Hello, we are going to be starting our zoo project today. So I'm going to be explaining what it entails and how to go about it. And then if you have questions, email me, come to my seminar, let me know. Okay. Congratulations, you have just been given $2,500,000 and you want to build a zoo. It's time to put your geometry skills to the ultimate test. You get to choose your animals and create the layout of their enclosures in your zoo. In this packet, you will find a list of animal species to choose from and how much they cost. You will also find how much a square foot of land will cost, as well as how much space each animal needs to live comfortably. For this project, one square on the grid paper represents 625 feet squared. This means a square is 25 feet by 25 feet. One line segment on the grid paper is 25 feet. See example below. So you're going to get grid paper, a big poster paper that has a grid on it, and that's going to be your zoo. So one square, just like this shown, okay, this square is 625 feet squared. And that's because this length is 25, this length is 25. And when you multiply those, you get 625 feet squared. So even though it's not that actual amount on the paper, it is in real life, okay? And we're designing an actual zoo for real life. So that's why this one square, the area of it is 625 feet squared. Okay. You have a purchase order in your packet. You must complete the purchase order before drawing any layouts of enclosures. You may not spend more than $2,500,000. So you're going to be turning in two things at the end of this. You're going to be turning in the map of the zoo, so your actual grid paper with the zoo, and your purchase order showing what animals you bought, how much space you needed, how much they cost altogether, and how much you spent. Okay. So each square foot in your design will cost $5. So an example, one square on your grid paper, so just like this, one square is 625 square feet, and that should say 625. So 625 times $5 means that one square on your grid paper costs $3,125. Okay. Because if you buy a lion, you have to buy the space that is needed for that lion. Okay, and it can't be the size of a classroom. It has to be big enough for that animal to live comfortably. So your directions, you must purchase enough animals to have 10 enclosures on your property. So that's 10 different areas for the animals. You must pick at least 2 species from each category. So we have our categories down here. We have land mammals, which is a big category. And you can see we have a hippopotamus, jaguar, kangaroo, and so forth. Those are the land mammals you can choose from. So you got to pick 2 from this category. You got to pick 2 from reptiles and amphibians, 2 from birds, and then 2 from the marine animals. So if you pick 2 from each category, that's 8 animals, and then you got to find 2 more from one of those categories to get up to 10. Okay, so those are your species that you're choosing from. Only 2 species can live alone in the enclosures. So if you look here, it says species, and then it has family group size minimum. So that means the beaver right here, you only need to buy 1 of them. Okay, that's what that means. But if you're going to buy a bat, you got to buy 12 of them at minimum. Okay, you can buy 20 of them, but 12 is the minimum. Okay, and the beaver, same thing. You can buy 10 of them, but 1 is the minimum. So you can only have 2 animals that live by themselves. So like the beaver, the camel, the grizzly bear, the hippopotamus, all of those you can buy just 1 if you want, but you can only buy 2 of those animals that can live on their own. Okay. You must have 2 to 4 restrooms and 2 to 4 concession stands. Restrooms are 625 square feet each, so just 1 square. Because that seems small on paper, but it's actually 625 square feet is a big area. You must complete the purchase order before drawing any layouts. Each building must be drawn to scale on the grid paper provided in class, and all enclosures for the marine animals must be circular shaped. And then the rest of the enclosures should be in a rectangular or square shaped. So most enclosures are going to be rectangular or square shaped, but your marine animals have to be circular shaped. So you're going to have to use A equals pi r squared. And then each building layout will have the following listed: the name of the animal, area of the enclosure, and the perimeter of the enclosure. So there's your directions. And I also have, after that, I have a checklist that can show you exactly what you are expected to do. Okay, which is pretty much what I explained in the directions, but this will help you kind of be like, okay, I finished that because I have 10 animals, at least 2 of them are from each category, and so on. So then you can see the order of what you should complete things, and you can see how much you have left to do. One thing I didn't mention above is that the whole map should be neatly colored, not just the animals that take up the space, but the restroom should be colored, concession stands. The areas that are not used should be turned into sidewalks, flowers, grass, trees, things like that. So the whole thing should be colored. Okay, and then it should be completed with something other than a pencil. You need to give your zoo a name. It needs to be written in the layout. And then the entrance of your zoo needs to be labeled so they know where we're walking in. Okay, so that's your checklist. So now I'm going to go over an example, okay, of filling out the purchase order. So let's say we want the meerkats, okay, which meerkats example is up here. That was taken from your species list. So I want to have meerkats in my zoo. I cannot have just one meerkat because the required family size is 12. So you can see here, our species is meerkat. You have to have a minimum of 12. So we can't buy 1, we can't buy 6. We have to buy at least 12, which means we can buy 12, 15, 14, 17. Anything that is 12 or more is what we can buy. Okay, so let's say, so I must have at least 12 meerkats. This means that I need 15,000 square feet of space for the first meerkat, plus an additional 5,000 square feet for each additional meerkat I have. So you see it says space required for first animal. So that first animal, I need 15, or not dollars, it's not dollars. It's the space required. So $15,000 square, oh my gosh, not dollars. 15,000 square feet is what I need for the first animal. So that's for one animal. But I am buying 12. So that's plus 11. So that's where this part comes into play. So it says space required for each additional animal. So for one meerkat, that's 15,000 square feet. And then I buy an extra 11. So I have to do 11 times 5,000 to figure out how much space I need for those ones. So I would need 55,000 for those 11 animals. And so when I add those together, I get 70,000. So that's how much space I would need for 12 total meerkats. Okay, and that explains that, what I did up here. It says I have 11 additional meerkats. That would be 11 times 5,000, which equals 55,000 additional square feet. That additional square footage plus the original 15,000 square feet for the first meerkat equals a total of 70,000 square feet of space needed for my meerkats. This means that since each square is 625 feet, I need at least 112 total squares. Okay, because that means, so it was 70,000, okay, which is all written right here. Okay, it gives you a perfect example of the meerkats. I do not want you to use this example. Okay, so we need 12, and then there's a column for quantity desired. So this is where you would put, okay, I want more than 12. I want 15, and you would put 15 there. But if you just want 12, you would leave that as 12. Okay, and then I'm going to skip these for now, and I'll go back to it. But the space required, we said up here was 70,000, so we put that there. And then to go from space required to how many squares you'll use, you have to divide by 625. Okay, because that's how much square feet is one square, and we want to know how many squares we'll need. So when I do 70,000 divided by 625, I get 112. Okay, a lot of yours are going to be decimals. So like if I would have gotten 67.2, that is just the minimum space required. So we don't want decimals, so I would go up to probably like 70, because then you got to figure out what's the length and what's the width of my square going to be. If the area is 70, then I could do 10 and 7. I could do 35 and 2, which you don't usually want to do 1 by 2, but you could. So on this example, since it's 112, you got to figure out what times what gets 112. So they figured out 14 times 8 gets you 112. And so that's going to be your length and your width of your rectangle. Okay. And then to find the cost of the land, remember it's the land number of squares times 3,125. So the amount you'll use is 112. So you do 112 times 3,125 because that's how much one square costs. And we'd get $350,000. And so then the last thing is you got to figure out the cost for each animal. So it says the cost for each animal is $750. Well, we bought 12 of them. So you do $750 times 12 and you get $9,000. Okay, so that means we spent $9,000 on the animals and then $350,000 on the land, and then we add them up to figure out how much the total cost is. Okay. And then on the last column, you'll do a running total of how much money you've spent because you want to get as close to that $2,500,000 as you can. Okay. So this says if the number of squares needed for the zoo calculates to be a decimal, like 12.2 squares, you must round up regardless of the decimal number because 12 squares will not be big enough. If you got 12.2 squares, that's the minimum. So you must go up to at least 13 squares. Okay. Find numbers that are easy to divide. Okay, like 13 would not be a good one because you can only do 13 times 1. But if we did 14, if we went up to 14 instead, we could do 2 and 7. Okay, so find numbers that are easy to divide. Okay, so then this is your rubric of how you're being graded. It is worth 160 points. So this is a big part of your grade this quarter. Okay, so you have to do well on it to keep a good grade. So 50 points for your purchase order being completed and being completed accurately. Okay? So that means you multiplied correctly, you subtracted, you followed the directions. Exhibits are calculated with the correct areas and drawn precisely to scale on grid paper provided. Animal names, area, and perimeter are recorded inside of each shape, and each animal exhibit is worth 7 points. So there's 10 exhibits, so that's why it's worth 70 points because they're each worth 7. So 10 times 7 is 70. The required number of restrooms are included on the layout and are the correct areas. Remember, you need 2 to 4. And then required number of concession stands are included and labeled, and you need 2 to 4. Okay, so those are both worth 10 points. The layout is neat, colored, and creative. All areas not taken by animals, restrooms, or concession stands should be colored neatly into sidewalks, grass, trees, flowers, fountains, etc. So just make it look pretty and nice. No writing is done in pencil, so everything should be gone over with Sharpie. Your zoo has a name and is written on your layout is worth 5 points. Your zoo's entrance is clearly labeled and drawn on your layout. That's worth 5 points. Bonus. If your purchase order is less than $1,000 away from, that should be 2.5. If it is $1,000 away from 2.5 budget you were given to spend, you get an additional 10 points extra credit. Okay, and we will go over that. So you want to get as close as you can to the $2,500,000 because you will get 10 points extra credit if you're within $1 million. Okay, so this whole thing is going to be on Canvas. I will print out some species lists for you guys to have in person so that you can use if that's a little easier. I will also have examples of previous classes, maps. So let me know if you guys have questions. This may seem very overwhelming, but it is actually very fun and students end up loving it. So just let me know if you have questions.